the Latina Leadership Podcast, the podcast made for Latinas by Latinas, with Angelica Cázares, Carolina Arenas, Diana Ruby, Jacqueline Villagomez, and Sonia Ramirez. Get comfortable, amiga, and enjoy the conversations.
Hola, amigas, and welcome to another edition of the Latina Leadership Podcast. I'm your co-host, Sonia Ramirez, and today I'm so excited. We have the LA Times Deputy Design Director, Martina Ibáñez-Baldor, as our guest today, and I am freaking out because I love the newsletter you guys have, the Latinx File. So when they told me that if I wanted to do the interview, I'm like, of course. I don't even have to think about it, of course. So I wanted to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So, oh my gosh, there's so much I want to ask you. But first, I wanted to start. If you can just tell me like a little bit about yourself and like your upbringing. And was it always your dream like to be like a designer or a journalist?
Yeah, so I was born in Toronto, in Canada. My mother is Argentinian, my dad is Chilean. They both migrated to Canada and met there and had me. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, though. I went to university there at Marquette University. I studied journalism and Spanish, and I minored in graphic design there. I had always been interested in the arts, in storytelling, photography, design. So I joined in high school our high school paper, and then in college the college paper and magazine, and really fell in love with all aspects of journalism. I did a bunch of random graphic design internships before I finally landed a journalism related internship at the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. And then I came to the LA Times, and I've been at the LA Times for 8 years now. I started as a page designer, designing the newspaper every day, and then have slowly transitioned into more digital spaces, designing for newsletters, for Instagram, creating illustrations and images for our website. And also now doing like social content, commissioning social videos for Instagram Reels and TikTok, and trying to gain our audience on those platforms.
Well, you gained me. I'm a big fan of you guys. Yeah, and how exciting! Oh my gosh, I'm gonna be honest with you. Hearing you give me your experience, it's like I'm talking to a younger version of myself because it's like I followed that path too. Like in high school, I was on the yearbook staff. In college, I was on the paper. I wrote for the paper at U of H and the yearbook too. So, and it's just been making my way, all these years to where I am today. But I'm interested. How exciting! What is it like to be a Latina growing up in Milwaukee? That's cool.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience. Milwaukee is one of the most segregated cities in the country. So it was definitely a strange experience. I liked where I grew up. I grew up right outside of Milwaukee in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. My we have no other family besides my parents and my siblings in the United States, but my parents made friends. Through like an Argentinian expat sort of societies. But for the most part, people around me, my neighbors, my friends were all white. And I did grow up a little bit confused about my identity. So when I moved to Los Angeles, it felt like a breath of fresh air. I felt like I found a place where I really belonged, where people were of similar background, similar upbringing. All of my friends are Latina, and it's been, just so nice to be with people with similar backgrounds in Los Angeles.
And what was that experience like? Did you move by yourself, or did your parents come, or they're still there? And what was it like to make that leap into LA?
Yeah, it was a pretty big leap. I thought I would stay in LA for only 6 months because I had joined a fellowship program. And then just really fell in love with it. I moved here by myself. When I moved here, it was the first time I'd ever been to LA. So it was at first a little bit of a culture shock, but I really fell in love with the people, the foods, the culture. the weather, everything about LA. I just fell in love with it.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear. And it's so proud to see, a Latina make it to somewhere like the LA Times. And that was one of the questions that I was interested in. I wanted to know if you could tell me a little bit about like the dynamics there, like the diversity. Are there many Latino writers, designers working at the LA Times?
Yeah, there is. We have I think the largest number of Latino staffers in a newsroom in the country. We have like a Latino Slack room for the LA Times, and I think there's about like 80 people in that Slack channel across editorial and business sides of the newsroom. So it's really nice to have a home like that at the Los Angeles Times. When I did start as a print designer, I was on a team of almost all white people, uh, older white men, and I joined
That's
as
interesting.
yes, one of the only like of two people of color, one of the only like two or three women on a team of maybe 15 people. So it was definitely interesting as a young Latina to start at the LA Times in that sort of environment. But over the years, the LA Times and the design department as well has made a lot of advances in terms of diversity and inclusion. Now our design team looks very, very different. We have a lot more women and people of color in leadership positions, and we make an effort to hire not only internally diverse candidates, but also when we're hiring freelance illustrators, freelance photographers, we make a huge effort to diversify who we hire.
That's exciting to hear, especially from a big publication like the LA Times. It's like refreshing and it gives hope to other like the next generation coming up that they can be where you are one day and not be afraid to take that leap that you took. I wanted to go back a little bit just to start out like with your education and how important was the education part growing up, having a philosophy professor as a dad and your mom has a degree in anthropology. What was that like?
Yeah, so my parents, because they are immigrants and because my dad comes from this academia background, education was one of the most important things, if not the most important thing that my parents stressed onto me and to my siblings. I remember Spanish was my first language growing up. So when I started school in the United States, I was a little bit behind my classmates. My teachers encouraged my parents to stop speaking to me in Spanish, which they refused to do, and I'm very grateful for that. But I did start a little bit behind from my classmates. But my parents, especially my dad, was very strict about studying, about homework. I remember being in the library doing flashcards in English and just
Oh, I can see that. It's like I can see you, visualize you doing that.
yeah, but yeah, and because my dad is a professor of philosophy at Marquette University, a college education was also very important to him and to my mom. Yes, very important.
And is there like a moment in your life where you can pinpoint, where you had the dream or you knew this was the field that you wanted to go in?
I think it started with my love of photography from a very young age. I was very intrigued by photography. I really loved taking photos. And I took a darkroom photography class in high school, which I completely fell in love with, and really wanted to pursue a career in fine art photography. That is pretty difficult, especially for, like a immigrant first generation Latina. So I really wanted to go to art school, but because my dad worked at Marquette University, we do get tuition remission to attend Marquette University. So that was a really obvious choice for me, and a pathway to find a life, a career in the arts was journalism, because I can do photography through journalism, I can design in journalism, and I can tell diverse storytelling, which is also a passion of mine, telling stories that are traditionally not told in larger media outlets.
Hmm. And what kind of stories do you cover? Like, do you have a niche, or do you cover like everything in the Latino community, or it's not just the Latino community?
Yeah, so we recently launched this new section called De Los. It's an expansion of the Latinx Files newsletter we launched around 2 months ago. And that section is focused on all things Latino culture and identity. So we've done a lot of profiles of local business owners, musicians, all sorts of profiles like that. We also tell stories on the news. Uh, Firsthand experiences. We just did a story on first gen college student advice for incoming first gen
I
students.
love that. I love that.
We've done a lot of community based stories. So on our Instagram platform, we'll throw a question out there, see what kind of responses we get, and then sometimes turn that into a story. That's how that first gen student story came about. Um, but we also tell stories of success, of joy. We like to stress that Latino joy, because sometimes, oftentimes in the news, Latino stories are about sadness. So we try to do the opposite
Mhm.
and tell stories of joy. So I think that has been pretty successful with our audience so far.
So y'all have a big audience. Like, what is how many people do you say are following you, or have y'all grown since the inception of the Los?
Yeah, we just reached 10,000 followers on Instagram,
Wow,
and
that's
it's only
great.
been like 2.5 months. So
Wow,
yeah,
awesome.
I think so far we're doing pretty good. We're getting you know, pretty good page views. We published a story about uh, the astronaut movie that just came out.
Yes, I love that movie. You know, I met him. I
Oh,
interviewed
really?
him for a story for the Chronicle, and then I saw this was before. This one's when it was going to be on Netflix, and then
Uh-huh.
they moved it to Prime. But it's like seeing the movie come full circle and remembering the interview with Mr. Hernandez. Everything he said, I saw in the film. It was like I could hear his voice and him telling me a story, and then seeing it on the big screen. I was like, I had chills. I have chills now. You know, my hair was standing up, but just the orgullo you feel to see one of our stories up there like that,
Yeah.
showcased. It was like amazing.
That is amazing. Yeah, we did a similar story where we interviewed him and the director of the movie, and that did really, really well. We got a pretty good amount of page views for that story, and it did well on Instagram as well. Yeah, the other thing that we're doing on our Instagram and TikTok platforms is experimenting with social video. So I've hired a few different freelance social video creators that are younger, who traditionally might not have like journalism experience, but they have already a built-in audience. They're already telling unique stories about their community through video. And those stories have done really well as well. We published a video a few days ago that went to Cal State LA, and the creator was asking students and faculty how they prefer to be identified: Latino, Hispanic, or something else. And that got a lot of comments that people were, debating within themselves, saying what they like to be called. So it's interesting to start those kind of conversations on our platform.
That's awesome. And why do you think something like the laws or even the Latinx files is so important in today's society to have?
Well, I think traditionally, Latino stories aren't told from our perspective. They're told to us, not about us. So, Latinx Files was a huge success. That one has over 40,000 subscribers to the newsletter. And it really proved that something like Delos could exist. It proved to our bosses at the LA Times that there are people that want to read these kind of stories, that are telling stories from a perspective of a younger Latino, that traditionally aren't told in the LA Times. And the Latinx Files newsletter, it did take a few years to convince our bosses that it was worth doing. And it wasn't until the murder of George Floyd in 2020 that newsroom leaders across the country started listening to our ideas and approving these ideas. And I'm glad they did because, like I said, I think it's really proved to our leaders that there is an audience for these kind of stories.
That's wonderful. Because I was going to ask how that conversation went because I know a lot of people in the industry. I feel like we talk and some people say, yeah, I had to fight for my stories. And I didn't know if you've ever gone through that where you had to fight for like your story about your community or a Latino story to go up and you know it's going to be a good story, but it's like, you see other stories going up, no issues, and then here you come and you have to fight for your story. Did you experience anything like that over your career?
Yeah, as a designer, I haven't had to like fight as much for stories, but I do. I've always tried to help my colleagues fight for stories. I've also had to fight for like different visuals that accompany stories about Latinos. I remember early in my career um, having to fight for photos that didn't really match. I remember like a story about Latino voters and Trump, and they just had like a photo of mariachi players in Boyle Heights, and it didn't really make sense to me. So that was like an instance where I really had to fight for how we're portraying Latinos through photographs and storytelling. But I know that a lot of the colleagues that we've hired onto the Delos team have had very similar experiences where they've had to fight for stories, or editors have shot down pitches because they didn't think it would fit with the Los Angeles Times direction. So that's the really amazing part about our team, is that we've brought in people internally from the LA Times and also externally. And I've heard very similar stories across the board. And that's why Delos is so special, because we are totally cool with telling all kinds of stories.
And y'all are so diverse. Like I said, a lot of times I'd get my ideas, I'd go check out the newsletter. It's like, oh, I'm going to pitch that, but in a way to where it fits like here in Houston, for Texas. And it's like,
Yeah.
you guys are like a template kind of, and I don't know if you realize that like there's a lot of people that go follow you guys and get ideas and get inspired by your stories. And I wanted to ask you, I wanted to go back a little bit also, and you said your first gen Latina. So I wanted to know if you can talk about what is that like? What kind of pressures came with that for you?
Yeah, I there is a certain pressure that gets put on first gen Latinas. I'm also the oldest of four siblings, so that eldest daughter pressure, I think, is also pretty high. Um, it's difficult. Like I said, we don't have any other family in the United States, so it was really up to me to like inform my parents about American culture. I remember growing up, and at like for my first Thanksgiving that I remember, I was like, "Where is our turkey?" My parents were like, "We don't do that." And eventually, we did adopt traditions like that.
Mhm.
I also had to, I remember explaining like what homecoming was and why I needed to get a new dress for homecoming. But besides those silly like anecdotes, there is a pressure for Latinas, first gen Latinas, to be educated, to be successful, but also to be family makers. I get pressure from my dad every day, like, when am I going to start a family? When am I going to get married? But there was also this pressure for me to go to school and for me to be, a career woman. So it's hard to balance all of those different pressures that get put onto us from our family and our culture.
Mhm. And what what is like a day like for you? Maybe like break it down like for somebody that might be interested in going in this field. What is like a day working at the LA Times look like for in your department?
Yeah, I think the exciting thing about working at the LA Times and on Delos is that every day is a little bit different. I usually start by checking my email. We have a daily meeting that we have every morning at 10:30, where we check on what stories we have upcoming, any sort of breaking news or trending stories that we can hop on. I will make sure that we have nice art for all of those stories. So I'll talk to my art director and see if she can create an illustration for stories. I'll email a few freelancers that I have on standby to assign them illustrations. I'm also in charge of our Instagram and TikTok page, so I will create some posts from the stories that we have on our website. I'll write the caption, post that on Instagram, also go through our DMs, like other people's posts. I'm trying to be engaging with our audience so that they see that we're listening, we see them. And then I just repeat that throughout the day, making sure that we have um, things going up on our Instagram stories. I'm responding to our freelancers and sometimes creating art myself for stories. Um, and then sometimes we have bigger projects that come along the way. We just published a 24-page print section that explains what Telos is, that highlights some of our best stories. So I spent the last few weeks really digging in on that. We just wrapped it up, and the next thing that I'll be doing is planning for Dia de Muertos. We have a big
Yeah.
event that we do at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. The last couple of years, we've published a altar on our website. It's a digital altar that anybody can submit an ofrenda to. So I'll be working on the design for that, the logistics on how we're going to be asking readers to submit those ofrendas. So every day, every month is a little bit different, but I think that's what makes it exciting to come to work every day.
I love that. It's like, oh my gosh, I want to be there with you guys. That's exciting. Now, what advice would you give to future generations, like somebody that wants to be in this field?
One of the biggest pieces of advice that I give to students that I talk to is to really connect with your professors and teachers, both in high school and in college. I had done many different random graphic design internships, one for a nonprofit, one for like a musical theater company, and I had a lot of trouble finding an internship that was journalism related. The one thing that really, really helped me was connecting with my professors, and one professor in particular who really looked out for all of the people of color in the journalism program. He was able to help me so much with like my cover letter, my resume, and he put me in contact with other people in the journalism field that eventually led to my first internship at the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. So that would be one of my biggest pieces of advice, is really lean into the resources that are around you. Especially for first generation students who don't maybe have those like family relationships or connections. You know, a lot of other people are able to tap into their parents' friends or their grandparents' friends for work connections. First generation students usually don't have those sort of connections. So I would really encourage them to talk to their teachers in high school, talk to their professors in college, find a mentor, and lean into other students. I also have students who DM me on Instagram asking me for advice. I don't know them, but I'm happy to help them because I've been in their shoes.
And speaking of mentors, who are some of the people that inspired you growing up?
Ooh, I was always really inspired by the women photographers that I saw in magazines, in National Geographic. I was inspired by artists like Georgia O'Keeffe, by Frida Kahlo. I really was drawn to those sort of women uh, that were pursuing arts, and especially for people like Georgia O'Keeffe and Frida Kahlo from that era that was so dominated by men. So I love. I'm reading this big book about Georgia O'Keeffe right now, and it's just so intriguing. And she was friends with Frida Kahlo. They like had a correspondence together. Um, I could go on and on about that.
Oh, I like hearing about that too. We could be here forever talking about that too.
Yeah, but I've always been really drawn to stories like that, and I love digging deeper into their backgrounds to see how they became successful.
And we always like to ask this of the guests. It's like leaders, like what does a leader mean to you? And do you consider yourself like a leader now in your field?
Yeah, I mean, I think it took a while to get over that imposter syndrome, but I do
Mhm.
consider myself a leader now. And I think a leader uh, is a mix of different things. You have to be compassionate, empathetic. I think empathy is really important in being a leader. You also have to be organized. You have to, know how to run meetings, how to create spreadsheets, how to manage your time and other people's time. I think it's really important to be empathetic, to see what your reporters, your designers, art directors are going through, to be able to help them in the best way, to help them be successful in whatever role they're in.
Mhm. And if somebody wanted to keep up with you, where would they find you? Like, where can they go and reach out to you? Like they said, if they want to ask you questions after this interview or want to, see what interesting things y'all are doing on Dead Loss, where can they do that?
Yeah, so they can reach out to me on Instagram. My username is _Martina Ibáñez. And then, of course, you can follow us on De Los on Instagram or TikTok, which is De Los Angeles Times.
I love that. I love that. And is there anything else you want to share with our audience that maybe we didn't cover or something else you want them to know about your journey?
I think, first generation Latinas, first generation students, Latinas in general, there is a lot of pressure that we're put under. There is that sense of imposter syndrome a lot. And I would just encourage people to try and get over that. Take up as much space as you can. You deserve to take up space, and make your voice heard.
You heard it here, folks. That's wonderful advice. You deserve to be here, Latinas. Amigas, this was a great interview. I hope it inspired everybody out there to, reach for the stars and you can do anything you want. Our beautiful guest here working at the LA Times, doing wonderful work. Thank you so much, Martina, for being on the show with us. It was such a pleasure to get to chat with you. And like I said, I felt like I was talking to a younger version of myself and seeing you out there doing great work. It inspires me, to know that the next generation is making moves and opening doors and creating, wonderful publications, that share our stories like their loss.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell my story.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much. And stay tuned, amigos y amigas. This episode will be up soon. You can follow us on all our major platforms, and give us a like or tell us what you think about this interview. And until next time, we'll see you. Bye.
What did you think of the conversation? If you enjoyed what you heard, let us know in the comments. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Thank you for listening to the Latina Leadership Podcast, and we will see you next time.